sources. We have quite a show today. Everything, Holly, from brain rot to Black Friday to crash test dummies, and all points in between. A lot going on. A lot happened over the weekend. Let's start with this brain rot because it sounds, maybe it sounds to me worse than it is. Maybe it is as bad as it sounds.
So it's interesting to me, brain rot was selected last year as the Oxford Dictionary Word of the Year, and it really is used to define perceived mental deterioration from over-consuming low-quality content. So basically junk food for the brain, like short-form videos that you find on TikTok and on Instagram. So there was a meta-analysis done by the American Psychological Association, and what that means is they looked at multiple studies done by other people. So this analysis looked at 71 studies and had almost 100,000 participants in it to look at how these short-form videos are affecting our brains.
So that would be a significant study and a series of studies. You would expect that
they're analyzing the studies. It's a study of the studies, right? And they're cross comparing findings and what they found was that it does in fact affect our brains and in negative ways, right? Over consuming these short form videos.
Yeah, and I was interested in that because the short form video is I guess what TikTok and what these are about. You just boom, boom, boom. These little.
An Instagram reel has to be less than 60 seconds, and on TikTok you can do slightly longer form. But I'm using those short form videos to just do a brief summary every day of what we talk about on our show, right? So you can consume my content, but these short form videos can really impact.
I wonder what it is about
brains.
the short form video. Just that your brain doesn't have time to sort of get up to speed on it, or there's nothing significant there. It's just one little blip of information, then you go to another one, and your brain's just not.
That's an interesting question, and I'm not sure if they addressed the why. They probably do, at least in some studies, but I can tell you that some of the impacts that people have found with these consumption of these videos, first of all, a lot of it they say is just low quality content, right? It's just not that interesting. It's not that educational. It's really low quality, but it's finding lower attention spans. It's finding even lower self-esteem and mental health, right? So if you're seeing these curated videos all the time talking about this ideal body type or the way you take care of your skin, even as a 10-year-old, that can have negative impacts.
Yeah, it's interesting. They found that heavy short-form video consumption, in other words, seeing a lot of short-form videos, is directly associated with diminished cognitive functions, particularly a person's ability to pay attention and control their inhibitions. And in younger and older age groups, it also is tied to poorer attention spans. The poorer attention span makes sense because there is no attention span to a 15 to 30 second.
It's the constant dopamine hits, right? So it's interesting that it's not just in young people. These impacts affect older people too, who are either doing doom scrolling, right, or just this consumption. One of the numbers that I saw that was pulled out is that the younger people who are using this are spending 6.5 hours a day watching these videos. That is an entire school day, at least in elementary school, 6.5 hours a day.
I wonder if brain rot is something that is reversible. I mean, is this something that is just affecting a person while they're watching it and shortly thereafter, or is this something that forever changes your brain?
I think it's not forever, right? I mean, there's always opportunities to learn, but one of the things that happens is you stop being able to do things like understand a book that you're reading or doing problem solving or what people call deep learning, right? Because you're not used to being able to spend so much time concentrating on something. So reading a physical book is different than watching these videos.
A 30-second video, and then you're on to the next one, right?
Yeah.
Because there's almost no way you can read unless it's a joke book or something.
Right.
30-second vignettes here or there, and moving on to the next one. And if you did, it wouldn't mean much to you anyway. That's an interesting study. And I guess the more I'm hearing about it and learning about it, even from you, the more I am not surprised
Right.
at this kind of. But so what do you do? I mean, I guess as a parent, you should be
You
aware
get
of
off.
this, and you tell your kids or your
Yeah.
friends, even adult friends,
Yeah.
you can't just spend your day staring at these
Or-
videos.
So we know that there's sleep impacts too. If you're spending too much time on social media right before you go to bed, that it can impact your sleep in negative ways. I have several friends, unnamed, that they scroll TikTok before they go to bed, right? Because at the end of the day, that's the way they feel like they de-stress and have downtime. But it does have negative impacts.
It probably has just the opposite impact.
It
It's
probably does.
not the thing you need to do.
So it's this brain rot is. It's interesting, right? Because you kind of joke about it and just say, oh, it's like junk food for the brain. But just like eating too much junk food for your body, it's not healthy and it's not good for you, and it has real impacts. So the study is actually called Feeds, Feelings, and Focus. And then it's a systematic review and meta-analysis examining the cognitive and mental health correlates of short-form video use, right? Because it's an academic study, so of course they have to use big words and a big title. But really, it's this look at 71 different studies with almost 100,000 users.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that they use the word brain rot, although maybe it's right, but it's sort of defined as the reducing a person's attention span and the ability to use critical thinking, which contributes to what they call brain rot. I mean, it's frightening, really. You think about it. Not surprising, but the more I'm reading about these findings and the significant number of individuals tested, a lot of studies coming to similar conclusions on each one. I mean, young people and maybe even our legislators and regulators need to take a look at this and say, hey, wait a minute, are we really doing the right thing here?
In a related note, there are 2 countries that are now banning social media use for anyone under age 16. Australia is one of them. I'm going to have to think about the other one. I think it's an African country, but there are 2 countries completely banning social media for anybody under age 16. But there's a related study. We only have about a minute left, but there's a related study in the New York Times where the New York Times is writing about it from MIT, where students using Chat GPT to write a paper. Right, one of the things that these researchers found is Chat GPT can help spit out a paper, but they didn't learn anything. They cannot even repeat back part of their
own paper,
of
right.
their own paper,
Yeah.
right? So there's they just cannot they can't do it. And even if you use the search engine like Google search, they could do a tiny bit, but of course if they write it themselves, then they can tell you, yeah, this is this part, and this is this part, and this is what I found. So this brain rot can impact people in a bunch of different ways. So getting rid of social media actually had noticeable impacts on our producer, Caitlin Johnson. And I wonder if any of our listeners have given up social media and noticed any changes. Did you notice an improvement in your attention span? We've been asked several times to go on social media fast and to cut down our usage. I'd like to hear from our listeners too. So text us at 57500 and we'll talk with Caitlin when we come back.
We're continuing our discussion about some new findings from the American Psychological Association that have tied short-term video content from apps such as TikTok and Instagram to what researchers are calling brain rot. It's an unfortunate phrase to define something that it really is problematic, it sounds like. But we want you to text us at 57500 if you've given up social media and noticed any improvement in your attention span.
Or even gone on a social media diet or changed how you use it. So, Caitlin, we have Caitlin Johnson in studio with us. She's our producer. You've been working on your relationship with social media for the past year, and you got rid of it completely earlier this year. So, tell us about that.
Well, when I saw this study, I saw it over the weekend post, and I was just like, yup, that is exactly what, like, I think we all knew that, but there's actually a study that's kind of backing this up now. But when I intentionally got off of it because, well, one, we were producing a conference special about unplugging, but I personally felt like social media was controlling my life, and I wanted to try to take back that control. And so I went 30 days without it completely, like not even accessing it on the computer, because there is a difference of it being on your phone and on a computer. And what I noticed significantly was just how much less anxiety I had, and also how much more I could focus and think clearly and critically about things that previously were just hard for me to do, but it's because I was cutting out the short form. And I allowed myself still to have YouTube because I was fine with long form. Like, I don't have an issue with that long form, and I could just pay more attention. I found myself reading more books without feeling anxious, like sitting and actually reading a book. Who'd have thought that you could do that nowadays? But yeah, that was my overall experience, and still to this day, like I recently deleted like Facebook and just a few apps off of my phone over the weekend because I was trying to get some stuff done and realized that I was wasting time on those.
So what was it about that? I mean, you're ahead of the curve here in terms of this study. What was it about these short-term things that you were videos that made you think there's something problematic?
Well, I just realized how it took me out of fight or flight, kind of being, because you're when you're scrolling and you get stuck in that scroll, you're just waiting for the next dopamine hit for the next video. And I actually spoke with a licensed psychologist, Magenta Silberman, with Huntsman Mental Health Institute. She talked a little bit more about how it impacts our attention spans.
Right? It's a very distracting opportunity for our brain. So I want us to think about, we have our executive functioning skills. It's right in the front of our brain. I want you to think of that as like the executive of your brain, sort of delegating and telling the rest of your brain what to do. And social media is going to really tax that part of our brain. We're going to have to switch between tasks. Either we're looking at different profiles or suddenly there's a different link and we're going down the rabbit hole of different topics. And that is really taxing to our executive there. We have to regulate our emotions because, as I'm sure you've probably experienced, when you're scrolling through, you might feel jealous, sad, angry. All of those are taxing for our brain as well. And we have to stop ourselves, which is also a really hard task for that executive in our brain. For anyone who's been on TikTok, there's really no end. So you have to will that into fruition. So there's a lot of impact on our attention in general for social media.
So what do you do now? I mean, are you just off it now altogether?
No, I've let myself back on, but I will say that I have to do check-ins, right? I found myself on TikTok. TikTok is one of the biggest problems. It does have no end. You can get sucked on there and you are stuck and you are literally, like, the brain rot is real. And the problem with it is you'll find an interesting topic, a video and you can have longer videos on TikTok and you don't even realize 2 hours has passed that you've wasted. But it's just the switching between topics that I find so detrimental, because there's interesting stuff on TikTok, which is the conflict. Because I find things that I'm interested in, but it's just you watch one video and then there's another topic and your brain is just in this constant switch. And so it causes anxiety and frustration. You just, as she explained, all these different emotions. And some of the content isn't that valuable either. I think you mentioned that in the last segment, that you are just kind of sitting there. And I just think that the critical thinking is gone. I actually saw, ironically, on TikTok last night, I saw someone like questioning how a college student could be taking notes by hand on paper, because she was like, how is her attention span allowing that? And I was like, oh no, this is a problem. And I actually do have a big concern for the younger generation, because I grew up without social media and it kind of came into my life like in high school. So it's kind of been a weird relationship for me. But I do have a big concern for people who are, younger now, because I just am very worried about their brains and older adults' brains who are just on social media all the time.
I think it's interesting. I do think that there are positive benefits to social media. There's a new Pew Research study that just came out a couple of days ago talking about how many people are on social media. And I saw an article last week talking about sometimes the benefits for older people. And by old, they defined anybody over 50, but older people, that it can be. But look, we have a number of texters. One person said, I haven't gotten rid of my social media, but I purged my following and followers list to just be family and close friends.
That's beneficial.
So, so they said it's helpful for mental health, fewer comparisons. Another one said, my family went on a 2-week screen fast with my 3 kids, 10, 8, and 4. It was so tough at first because we found that we filled downtime with the screens. Mm-hmm. But after the first week, everybody started using their imaginations and playing together again. Now we only do screens on Sundays and as a family. They hate it sometimes, but we feel strongly that moderation through the school week is good for their health. Yeah. And then another one who says, I haven't noticed any clearer concentration after social media fasts. I have noticed, though, that I don't feel withdrawn after a week or so without social media. So I realize that social media use accomplishes nothing for me unless I go in for a specific purpose, which is what you were saying.
I agree with that. And I think we'll play one other soundbite in just a second. But using it more intentionally, and one other thing, I was just going back to that previous texter, it's like I forgot that we could go outside and talk to people face to face. Like that's just one thing that like I think my generation specifically struggles with. And so that in-person connection is really what I prioritize. And I did actually realize that I didn't talk to a lot of people outside of the digital world. But the biggest takeaway I got from my conversation and just my own experience was using social media more intentionally and with a purpose. And so we can play that second soundbite there.
If we're using social media in an intentional way and in a way that's thoughtful of how it incorporates into the rest of our lives, right, then we're not going to see the same impact negatively on our mental health. It's when we're not engaging intentionally, when we're doing it mindlessly, we're avoiding things, or we're not engaging in our offline life in the way that we want to, that's when it becomes more concerning, more detrimental.
Was it difficult, Caitlin, to just cold turkey get off this? Not that it's an addiction, but you're used to something. It's something you've
100%.
been right.
But yes, it was difficult. After like 3 days I was fine. So you think it's hard, and then you kind of start getting like, you literally have like the urge to grab your phone and check it, and you're like, oh, I guess I'll check my email, done with that. But after a few days, you just realize you don't need it. And I am like a big advocate. And this is me telling myself, like, I think over this next week, I'll probably delete all of the apps off of my phone. So I'm not just spending my Thanksgiving holiday just doom scrolling, and actually just being present and like reading books and doing all of that. But I don't think that we all need social media on our phone. I think that you can access it on a computer and be just fine. That's just my take.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I think sometimes we mistake online connections with the true connections that you're talking about, but also it can be a way to stay in touch with family and friends, right? I mean, that is one way that people like put out notices for wedding invitations, but if the algorithm doesn't feed it to you, then you don't even know.
That is true. And I do think that there's just that you have to find that balance, so it's not taking over your life, but you're still just using it as a tool to connect. And I think that everyone may have a different approach to that, but for me, I think I don't need to be on it as much.
We have one texter. We have several others, but one says, I gave up social media 2 years ago completely. I've never regretted it. I feel better, have more energy, a better outlook, and life is better in general.
Kudos to you.
So
yeah, and I'm
on it all the time.
Yeah, I'm not. But I'm sort of getting onto it more and more, but maybe I'm going in the wrong direction.
No, there's a benefit. There's pros and cons. It's just don't let it take over your life, and that's why I have the concern for the younger generation, because I see that happening right now. So just be mindful and try not to rot as much as you do, because we all like rot days. I know it.
We've been talking about this morning about some new findings from the American Psychological Association that have tied short-term video content from apps such as TikTok and Instagram's Reels to what researchers have called brain rot. I wish they had a better name for that.
Well, it's descriptive, right? And
it is.
We talked about this study that was published that has, it's a meta-analysis. So it was looking at 71 different studies, almost 100,000 individuals. And what they found was that there are some real impacts. So we have with us Dr. Matthew Checketts. He's a licensed clinical social worker at the University of Utah Huntsman Mental Health Institute Neurobehavior Home Program. So Dr. Checketts, thanks for joining us.
You bet. Glad to be here.
Can you tell us, what is your first reaction to hearing about this meta-analysis that finds that short-term video can cause brain rot, or basically have a big impact on our brain health?
Well, the first thing that I thought was it wasn't actually that surprising when we sort of think about times where we would maybe read books, but now really we're focused a lot on just video content. And it also made me think a lot about just things like executive functions, or the ability to be kind of mentally flexible or hold back some of our responses. It was kind of my first thought.
Dr. Checketts, what do you think it is about these short form videos, these 15, 30, 60-second videos that make this more prevalent?
Well, I think that we have a tendency to just associate visually. So I think that we're constantly getting kind of new dopamine hits because we're seeing new content, opposed to having to listen for maybe long form information. I also think, though, that it plays to a lot of our cognitive biases. We have a tendency to really appreciate kind of our own opinions. And so, we have confirmation biases, or we learn visually, and so we see something and we agree with it because, again, it kind of plays to what that fundamental bias is.
So I know that this new study shows, well, this combination, right, shows increased anxiety, loneliness, poorer sleep among heavy users. Are there symptoms that you see with your clients who struggle with social media use?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, many of the people that I work with are neurodivergent, so they're going to struggle a little bit with socializing anyway. And many times what benefits them is social interaction. Commonly, though, they're defaulting to just looking at their phones and really not practicing communication skills or being out in the community. So I think that that's particularly problematic for everyone, but definitely for the folks that I work with. And so if we think about the term neuroplasticity, we train our brain, and if we train our brain just to be online as opposed to train our brain to navigate new situations or social conversation, then we kind of find ourselves either learning and adapting through that training or simply becoming kind of consumed with just an automatic thought, which is, this is what we see and this is what we say.
And Doctor, what can be the long-term consequences of this continued barrage of looking at these social media sites and just almost being obsessed with them?
Well, I think that you can find inhibition control is reduced, so we tend to be more reactive. Again, cognitive flexibility, so thinking about new ideas or metacognition, thinking about our thinking, tends to be a little bit reduced because we're not thinking, we're just reacting. And I just think fundamentally that we're just exposed to fewer ideas, and so our overall intelligence and broad knowledge tends to be a little bit based in an echo chamber instead of looking at all sorts of new information. So we just tend to know less.
So can you give our listeners, and me as well, some tips for how to both red flags for what to look at with our kids, but how to have better control over these platforms?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you can start with is just consolidate how many platforms you have on your phone. A lot of times I'll notice people that they have every social media site and they're posting across all social media sites, which realistically isn't necessary. Oftentimes people are maybe interacting on one more than the other. They may have push notifications turned on, and so there's a barrage of information that's kind of coming to them, which isn't particularly helpful or even necessary. So I think that there are some of those type of things that you can do that probably are helpful.
Dr. Checketts, this might be a little bit out of your wheelhouse, but do you suppose that there is a time and place for regulation and something that our legislature can do to try to limit what our young people are seeing and experiencing with some of these platforms?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, if we're looking at a platform that's intentionally stoking division, if their algorithm is built to that particular format, I think that there's probably a public voice that needs to be heard within that context because, we have to look at things socially. Certainly we should have the ability to engage in free speech and dialogue. Also, though, if those companies are forcing information and collating that information in a format that's intentionally harmful, that's not great. I think if you were to, again, look back at written media, say, for example, the newspapers, there was an intention of, looking at a pro and a con or trying to publish sort of both sides of an argument. Those things are useful because it forces us to consider all sides. And I think that's good for society.
I'm wondering what your advice is to parents who feel like they do have children who maybe are neurodivergent, as you mentioned, and they find real comfort in this scrolling, but it's also maybe not that healthy. How do you get them to integrate better socially and not just disappear into these apps?
Well, I work a lot with those individuals, and while I actually believe that it's quite helpful in many ways to engage in a small amount of scrolling, but also have sort of a diversity activity and break up that scrolling. So, for example, there are many times where someone's overstimulated or they're frustrated, and they may gain a benefit from just being involved in something visually. They also, though, have to practice and sort of, again, train their brain to set that phone down and move around, do something different, engage in sort of a broader collection of activities. In psychology, we call that behavioral activation because we're encouraging people to get up and move and go. And so I think really it's about the amount of time that you're spending engaged in those activities and whether or not you're doing other things.
Do you suppose that these findings from the American Psychological Association will have any effect on these platforms themselves, TikTok and Instagram? Maybe them realize you don't want to be associated with brain rot in your program. Do you suppose that any of these platforms will say, hey, we've taken these seriously and here's what we're going to do?
Well, we can hope so. I think that when you look at those platforms, I would suppose that there's a benefit for offering diverse content. I noticed the other day on YouTube that they were offering a teen account, and I thought that was a good sign. It seems to suggest that they're taking that quite seriously and, possibly promoting something a little different.
Thank you so much for joining us. We've been speaking with Dr. Matthew Checketts. He's a licensed clinical social worker at the University of Utah, Huntsman Mental Health Institute's Neurobehavior Home Program.
And it's good to get it's good to get that perspective and understand, from a clinician's point of view, the harm that this has caused.
Exactly. And I was struck by his comment that there can be good uses, even for kids who may struggle socially anyway, that there can be good uses of social media. That's one thing that I don't know that people necessarily are calling for a total ban on these. But look, your last question about will the social media companies do something about it? Not if it's making them money, they won't.
Yeah, maybe not. But Dr. Checketts did also talk about the pushback that we'll get, which is, hey, it's the First Amendment, it's speech, it's content, it's that type of thing. But when it comes to harming listeners or harming our young people, maybe it's time that we jump in and either, if the platforms themselves don't do it, maybe our regulators will.
I don't know. On some certain types of content, I just don't know on the brain rot stuff because most of it is lower quality content anyway.